Hey, what's up? How you doing? It's your friend Phil here. Welcome to our 40-day series on 40 days to PMP and CPM exam success. It's great to have you here today. We are moving on to Chapter 2 in the PMBOK guide. Chapter 2 is really all about organizational influences on projects and also taking a look at the project life cycle, taking a look at some of the characteristics of the project life cycle. We're also going to be looking at stakeholders, what exactly stakeholders are, talking a little bit about governance. Now, this is not meant to replace Chapter 13, where there's a lot of talk about stakeholders and the process for stakeholder management. We're also going to be taking a look at project team composition and a little bit about the different flavors of project management that exist. So let's cut to the chase and talk about organizational influences on projects. The composition and the philosophy of organizations could influence how projects are managed. The folks in leadership in a firm, they influence how projects are managed. And for that reason, we have a term called project governance. And project governance and how structured it is and how it's followed to the letter or not depends a lot on people at the helm, depends a lot on management. Now, as far as organizational structure is concerned, we have three broad categories of organizational structures and one more category that's like a combination of all three. The first is functional organization. A functional organization is very siloed. You report to one boss and it's very clear cut what your responsibilities are. We call that functional. You can read up the details in the PMBOK guide. Now, in a functional organization, the balance of power obviously rests with the functional manager. In firms like this, project management is looked at as a part-time endeavor. You could have people managing projects, but a lot of the time these folks just come in and manage a little bit of the project. I wouldn't even use the word manage. They probably participate more than manage. They're more administrative. And for that reason, one of the terms used for project managers in this organization type is called a project expediter or a project coordinator. Now, they're not the same thing. A project expediter does not have as much power as a project coordinator. Project expediter does things that are pretty clear cut without wielding any form of authority. You could think about it as a gopher, that kind of position. A project coordinator can use more of his or her initiative to get things done. So there's a little difference there. Now, talking about the next organization type, the step up from functional, it's called matrix. And a lot of folks work in matrix type organizations where you have two entities. You have the project manager and you have the functional manager. But matrix organizations could be broken down further into three. You've got a weak matrix where the project manager's power is very low. The balance of power lies in favor of the functional manager. And for that reason, it's called weak because the PM is weak. Just think about the project manager being weak. Then we have right there in the middle, we have the balanced matrix where the balance of power lies right there in the middle, and it could be the functional manager having more clout in terms of resources, just a little bit more clout, maybe a 40-60, but when it comes to the management of cost, it could be in the favor of the project manager, So it's not always a 50-50 balance. It could be split 60-40 in favor of the PM and then a 40-60 in favor of the functional manager. It really all depends. Okay, but the bottom line is the power is equally distributed between the functional and the project manager. The next type of matrix organization that we have is called a strong matrix. The PM is strong in this one. The balance of power lies more in the favor of the PM. And in this organization types, the matrix organization types, you probably figured the employees report to two bosses, PM, functional manager. In this case, the PM has more power in the strong matrix. Weak matrix, project manager has least power and is weak. The last organization type is known as projectized organization, and this is the project manager's ultimate dream because they have all the power. They have, in these organization types, they have, if not 100% of the power, they have, I would say, total, almost all, or total. I've forgotten how the PMI puts it. You might want to read it up in there. They've got a way they describe this thing in the PMBOK guide. You know, the language is very specific. They don't want you to think that the PM has all the power all the time in projectized organizations. In some projectized organizations, the PM may not have 100% of the power. Now that begs the question, are there functional managers in projectized firms? There will be, because you will have functions such as HR, you will have functions such as accounting and so on that may not necessarily be under the PMO or report to a project manager. But just read the language, you know, and be able to decipher which organization you're in. Don't get caught on the small stuff. Like I said, chapters 1, 2, and 3, you're not going to get a bunch of questions that are solely based on that, but the language regarding projects, programs, and portfolios, and all this other stuff could be in the questions. What else do we have in chapter 2? In chapter 2, once you get done with the organizational structure, and you've read up about organizational governance and that kind of thing, the next thing you want to think about is the characteristics of the project life cycle. Project life cycle characteristics. Now, the project life cycle, as you know, it starts off with a lower use of resources on most projects, lower costs on most projects, and then that cost tapers off as you get to the close of the project, but it peaks in the middle. So you have low resource usage or low cost, middle of the project, higher resource usage, high cost, and then it tapers off towards the end. And that's looked at as a characteristic of the project life cycle. It's probably a no-brainer to you, but in the world of the PMI, it is one of the characteristics. We also could look at the probability that a risk would happen and where that is highest, where it's the probability of a risk occurring highest. It's highest when you do not know as much on the project, which is at the beginning. Probability of a risk happening on a project is highest at the beginning, and as you go through the project, as progressive elaboration kicks in, you begin to know more and more and more about the project, right? That's how it works. So risk, probability of a risk is highest at the beginning, lowest as you get towards the end. What about the impact of a risk? The impact of a risk happening early in the project is at its lowest. Why? Because you haven't spent as much. Remember, the cost peaks in the middle, the intensity of the cost, and then tapers off. So just bear that in mind, that there's a difference between the probability of a risk and the impact of a risk. Probability of a risk is highest in the beginning. Impact of a risk is highest at the end. After you've spent all that money, all those resources, and then boom, a risk happens, that risk in most cases will have a higher impact if it happens towards the end of the project, especially if it requires a lot of rework and stuff. You want to do rework before you've gone too far, you know, smaller chunks of rework before you've spent tons of money and then you've got those things to rework. So just keep that in mind, okay? Now, regarding the ability of stakeholders, or I should say the willingness of stakeholders, because there's a difference. The willingness of stakeholders to make changes on a project are typically lowest as you get towards the end of the project and highest earlier on in the project. In other words, stakeholders, customers, sponsors, whatever you call them, they would be inclined to make changes if a lot of money has not been spent and the change is not going to cost a lot of money, you know. But if the change will cost a lot of money, then it is most likely, in many circumstances, I should say most, that stakeholders would not want to make changes. So there's a difference. One of my students in the class said, Phil, you know, the PMI have got it wrong, because they're saying the ability for stakeholders to make changes, or the customer to make changes, diminishes. No, it doesn't. On many a project, it's a straight line. The customer is always in control and they can do whatever they like on most projects, you know. But I think what the PMI is trying to say, to make it clearer, is, yeah, we know the stakeholders are powerful. They maintain a straight line of power. The power doesn't diminish, but their willingness to make changes in most circumstances will diminish if more money has been spent. So that's another characteristic. The next one that we have to talk about here is the different approaches to managing projects. So we have a fully plan-driven approach to project management. You know, fully plan-driven involves creating a plan for everything that you're working on the project. Let me check my notes here. And creating a plan for everything that's meant to be happening on the project, and you know exactly where you are headed towards before you get there. And that's fully plan driven. We also have another flavor, which is known as iterative and incremental life cycles. And this has to do more with the iterations that you would go through on a project to get to completion. And this is not to be confused with change-driven or agile. So I'd like you to read up about change-driven project management, or agile, which thrives on change. In fact, it looks at change as being good. The earlier we can change things that are not in line with the ever-changing business objectives, the better. So we've got fully plan-driven, also known as predictive. We've got the iterative or incremental life cycles, and then at the end of the chapter it talks about agile or change driven. So read those up. I think there's one more thing we need to talk about. Let me make sure. The last thing to talk about is, well, they talk a little bit about project phases in chapter 2, and how you've got the sequential relationships between phases and the overlapping relationships, which is a no-brainer. Do I have anything else to talk about here? I think we are largely done. So we're done, and that is chapter 2. Chapter 2 is done. So we've done chapters 1 and 2, and tomorrow it will be off to chapter 3 to begin to talk about the 47 processes of project management at a high level. I would be referring you to a video that's out there on YouTube on the 47 processes. I have that video out there, so you can watch that video as well to help you with chapter 3 when we get there tomorrow. Alright, but for today, I would like you to open up your PMBOK guide, go through a lot of the things I've talked about, the terms, the areas that are a bit gray. Find out if you can make those areas a bit clearer for you. Try and do that and see where you are in chapter 2. Okay? I wish you all the best and speak to you tomorrow. Bye for now.